Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to this evening's edition of Humanity versus Insanity, the Crane Report. Now, a lot is happening, and it's very, very clear that the establishment are becoming increasingly concerned at the speed with which the people in the general population are starting to awaken to their scams, to their treasonous behavior in many cases. And one thing that actually highlights this, of course, is the speed with which activists are being targeted in the social media. And very topical, really, because earlier today, 2 of my Facebook accounts were deleted, supposedly on the basis that I was in breach of Facebook's terms. Well, the reality is that these are accounts that have been in existence for quite a number of years now. They had already forced a change in my main account because they didn't recognize Ian R. Crane. So I was forced to reveal that my middle name is actually Roland. So yeah, it's now Ian Roland Crane. But on the basis that, the Facebook pages I now have are the personal one of Ian Roland Crane, which is, of course, limited to Facebook's current tally of 5,000 friends. And then the 2 pages of the 2 shows, Humanity versus Insanity and Fracking Nightmare. But just in case my Facebook accounts do suddenly disappear, may I encourage you to sign up to my newsletter, and you can do that either on my website, which is ianrcrane.com, or via frackingnightmare.com. So we shouldn't be at all surprised, of course, because the duplicity of our own government is becoming truly staggering. And who better to have on tonight's show to comment on what's unfolding in the global arena and here on the domestic scene is my good friend Ken O'Keefe. Now, I first came across Ken a number of years ago, and having looked into his background, was absolutely taken aback by the efforts that this guy has put in over probably the past 20 years now to raise awareness of the unfolding geopolitical agenda. So, Ken, can you see me? Are you there?
I see you, and it's a pleasure to be back, Ian. How are you doing, my brother?
Hey, excellent, excellent. Now, you've only recently returned from a couple of weeks in Tehran. And now it's probably 22 years since I was in Tehran. And I must confess that I remember very much the wonderful hospitality of the people there, and going up into the hills around Tehran, and being, of course, treated to some delightful kebab. How was your trip, my friend?
Yeah, Iran, it's almost like a mirror image, a reverse process of America, really. America, you grow up, it's the greatest nation in the world, and da-da-da-da-da, and then you grow a little wiser and start looking into things deeper and realizing, oh, shoot, it's actually not quite the greatest unless you're considering war and occupation to be great. And Iran is the opposite. You start off thinking it's awful. They just hate us, and they want to kill, and da-da-da-da-da. And the truth is that they're really beautiful people. They have an amazing history. There's so many facts about Iran that are purposely kept from Western so-called civilization. And, what a great blessing to go there. Really good people. I had a great time. Absolutely.
And I must confess that more and more people are starting to realize that actually, I'm not going to suggest for one moment that these places are the ultimate Shangri-La, but, the places such as Russia and Iran in particular, are demonized in such a way so that the average person in the West unfortunately perceives them as the great Satan, which of course is how they in turn perceive the US. But one might argue that it's more justified from their perspective than it is from ours.
I certainly have to agree with that. I mean, in the case of Iran, it's just a historical fact that they have not conducted any war in the last 300 years, except for the one war that was imposed upon them by our attack dog, Saddam Hussein, as punishment for the Iranians having the nerve to oust our puppet in the Shah of Iran. So aside from one war, and if you get into the details of that war and what Iran faced and what it actually achieved in defense of the nation, you couldn't help but really respect these people. I mean, deeply. They were punished for having done the right thing, getting rid of our puppet, and ultimately, these people have a lot to be proud of. And as you say, it's not a Shangri-La. It's not, perfect. There are problems in Iran. They have corruption. There is abuse of power, and there are many things to improve. But overall, the amount of integrity that I see in a place like Iran and Russia as well, it's something that we can certainly be jealous of in the West, because we have virtually no integrity or honor within politics in the West.
Well, yeah, and obviously, as a U.S. national, I believe your home is actually Hawaii in the U.S. Is that correct?
Yes. Well, I have formally renounced my U.S. citizenship, so it really does come down to a matter of whether the state literally owns us and self-determination is a fallacy, or self-determination does indeed exist, and we determine our political, religious, national status. So I'm an Irish citizen. I'm also a Hawaiian national, and I have also been bestowed very honorably with Palestinian citizenship. I do have to use a U.S. passport to travel into the United States. I do this under duress, and any contract under duress is not binding, and I would never do it. I would never hold a U.S. passport, but my mother used to live in Hawaii. She passed on earlier this year. If I wanted to go back and see her, they forced me to use this. So at the end of the day, I'm not a U.S. citizen. I would be happy to repatriate back to the United States if it ever found its honor, and it put the U.S. Constitution back in place and got rid of all these traitors, charged them with treason. But until such time, I find no pride in my birth nation. While it has many good things and many good people, I am not down with the social contract of citizenship, and therefore I'm not a U.S. citizen.
Hey, well, listen, likewise, sadly, I consider myself British at the moment by accident of birth. And at a recent event, I actually asked the audience to put their hand up if they were proud to be British. And only one person actually raised their hand, and I asked them what it was about Britain that made them proud, and they said football. And this was just after England's rapid departure from the World Cup. And so I said, well, I think you were struggling right from the get-go, and then, you reached out in desperation. But, the sad reality was that this was an audience of some, 300 or so people, and that, there was nobody put their hand up, bar this one person. So, sadly, I'm in the same vein here. And I just want to take one example of why it is that, Britain has lost its honour in the same way that the US has lost its honour. And if we can, bring this up on screen, this is David Cameron a few weeks ago.
Oh, boy.
This is David Cameron. Cameron backs Hong Kong rights. Basically saying that Prime Minister David Cameron said that Britain should stand up for the rights of the people of Hong Kong after more than 2 weeks of pro-democracy protests in the former British colony. Asked about the protests during Wednesday's Prime Minister's Question Times, Cameron said, "It's important that democracy involves real choices." And this is the duplicity of the man. And of course, this is Parliament Square, weekend before last, when the Occupy movement decided that basically it was time to once again let David Cameron and the British government and the parliamentary elite let them know that the British people were starting to see through the lies and the deceit and the obfuscation. And this, of course, has had almost total media blackout in the UK. So, for anybody watching overseas, anybody who believes that the UK is a democracy, and I've got another shot here, is what became known as the tarpaulin protest because the protesters were sitting on a tarpaulin to sort of keep the damp off from the grass, and the tarpaulin was decreed to be a structure, and thereby becoming illegal. So, the reality is that the UK is not a democracy in any way, shape or form. And, as we're going to see as we go through the evening and later on tonight in Fracking Nightmare, which will be on UK Column Live at 9 o'clock. But increasingly, the rights of the people, the rights to be heard, are being systematically removed at a rate of knots that I don't think the vast majority of people have any perception about. So Ken, you've adopted the UK, at least temporarily, as your home. So you have the luxury of being sort of, if you like, the visitor looking in. And what is your perception of what's occurring in the UK right now?
Well, I mean, first off, I have to say it's fitting that I'm here in London, really, which I consider very much to be the belly of the beast. If you see the world the way I do, the financial system is the seat of power. It effectively affords those who run the world an infinite supply of money, and I don't think many people realize what that means. Imagine if you had an infinite supply of money. That's almost impossible for most to imagine, but that is indeed what we have gifted the psychopaths who run the world, and they're very much centered here in London. So it's fitting that I'm here. But ultimately, what I see in the UK is the same pattern that we see everywhere in the West and also in other parts of the world. Governments which are corrupt are going to use every means possible to concentrate power further and further, and they will use all sorts of manipulations and pretexts and false flags in order to achieve that goal. We see very likely that may be what's happening again in Canada and Ottawa and whatnot, certainly very convenient timing. But we see this pattern over and over. And the UK, as you say, is not a democracy. There was a high court judge several years back who was sitting on a case, I forget his name, but sitting on a case about election fraud in the UK. And his statement at the end of this case, effectively, I'm paraphrasing here, was that the level of fraud within the UK election system in this particular case was so gross that it would make a banana republic blush. So, this is a high court judge. At least there is some integrity within the court system. But again, even the court system is bought and paid for largely. But, there is some truth that sneaks out. And this is the UK. The US is the same thing. I mean, hell, the president can execute anyone, anywhere, anytime under the pretext that he deems them to be a terrorist, and they can kill American citizens as well, which I've read the U.S. Constitution, and I'm still trying to figure out exactly where that was. And this man is a constitutionally trained attorney. I mean, he went to Harvard and learned constitutional law, for Christ's sake, and apparently he believes that it's consistent to be able to execute anyone, anywhere, anytime, with no due process of law. It's a joke.
Well, are we talking about Barry Soetoro?
What's that?
Are we talking about Barry Soetoro here?
Yeah.
So, well, he has no allegiance to the U.S. Constitution anyway.
Yeah, he doesn't.
So, and actually, Reagan was at least the consummate actor. A B-movie actor, but at least he played the role. I mean, Obama doesn't even play the role. I mean, he just basically gets up there and reads the scripts. I mean, the last time I was in the US, I mean, the joke was that if you ask Obama 5 minutes before he goes on platform what he's going to speak about, he hasn't got a clue. Yeah. And if you ask him 5 minutes after he's just come off platform what he's just spoken about, he hasn't got a clue. Because he literally goes up there, reads the teleprompters, and steps off platform. And I mean, that's basically all he does.
And that's all a president is meant to do. I mean, the last thing that the powers that be would want is a president who actually thinks for himself. And the last president that actually did that was John F. Kennedy.
Yeah.
All the rest of them have followed the orders and read the script very well. I would agree. Reagan was really good. He also played the role quite well. He didn't just, read the script. So, This is the way it is, and all of them are actors. And as Shakespeare very rightly said, all the world is a stage. And you know what I think is really kind of being an observer of the kind of the way the world functions for many years now. I think people need to realize that while the illusion is very, very powerful, it is very powerful. I mean, you watch the news and wow, all these people are saying these things, and you know, these experts and all of these academics and so on and so forth, they're all saying the same sorts of things and defining the reality that we live in. But the truth is, what they're talking about, and all these distractions, pop culture and football and all this sort of stuff, all of it is just it's an alternate reality. And the reality is found, if you want it, it's there for people to look at and see the real world as it is. But it's not what is being presented to us, and the illusion itself is very powerful. So many people still think that we're not getting anywhere, that there is no real change. But I beg to differ. There's huge change. The amount of awareness that has been occurring over the last 10 years in particular, ever since 9/11 specifically, is massive, massive. Things that people had no idea about on that very fateful day, they now are commonplace known. You know, facts, false flag events as a perfect example. Nobody knew what a false flag was just 13 years ago. Now, you know, the overwhelming majority know, and not only that, but when any event occurs, there are millions of people dissecting every aspect of whatever the event is. And if there are any mistakes, which invariably there are, it's being broken down and exposed. And this in itself, just that one thing, is massive progress.
Yeah, without any shadow of doubt. And I think, as you rightly say, here we are 13 years on. And as I've commented, a number of times on this program over the past year or so, in the aftermath of 9/11, I was one of about 24 people who were focused full time into researching those events. And I know it was about 24 because we were all in contact with each other. And in fact, the last public presentation that I gave on the events of 2011, although I did do one in 2011 as a one-off on the anniversary, on the 10th anniversary. But before that, the last time was 2006. And the reason I decided to move away from it was because by that time, there were so many other people on the case that, it was time to move on and do something different. But if we look back, 9/11, Bali 1, Bali 2, Bombay, Mumbai. Then we have 7/7, and not in any particular order here.
Yeah.
But all of these events, as you say, have been dissected. And then we look at the domestic events in the US. Yeah. Like the Aurora shooting, even the Columbine High School shooting, Sandy Hook.
Yes. Boston, the Boston
Marathon, Ottawa, and of course we know exactly what to look for, and it's almost like there's a template, and they're not particularly creative because they tend to use pretty much the same template with just a few minor modifications, and immediately, like you say, there are literally tens or hundreds of thousands of people dissecting them. And what these globalists have to work on is that even though they're being dissected, it's still only 3, 4 or 5% of the population that are perhaps aware, and they've still got the other 95% exactly where they need them. But they are getting very worried that number is growing exponentially in terms of the awareness, which is why they're doing what they're doing, like shutting down Facebook pages of activists, like having a complete media blackout on what's occurring in Parliament Square. And, we can expect this to continue. So consequently, we also have to be increasingly creative in terms of the ways in which we communicate.
Yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head with that one word, creative. The powers that be, despite having all of these resources, and I mean literally with an infinite supply of money, they own the governments, they own the police, they own the courts, they own Hollywood, they own the mainstream media, they own the corporations, they own the energy supplies, they own all of that. They have infiltrators everywhere. I mean, it's quite amazing the amount of resources they have, and yet they're losing. And the reason why they're losing is because really the most powerful weapon of all is the truth. And for whatever reason, they made, in my opinion, a drastic error for ever allowing the internet to come into play. Because when you allow access to information, invariably, while many people will just totally ignore and just totally be oblivious to the beauty and the power of such a access, many will also choose to use that. And I'm one of them. You're one of them. There's so many other people out there, countless millions, tens of millions, perhaps even billions, that are actually seeking to understand the truth. And as we come to this understanding of the truth, it doesn't matter what perspective, whether you come from the West, whether you come from Africa, whether you come from China, whether you're poor, whether you're middle class, even rich, doesn't really matter. The truth is the truth. And no matter how different your angle, your perspective is, it will bring you to the same place. And the same truth that we all come to know eventually is that, guess what? We're all being used. And we don't need a world like this. We don't need to be fighting for the crumbs while those who are running the world have an infinite supply of money. It's not even about the money for them. They have the money. They've got all the money, and they can dole out money to whoever they want. Whoever will work for them, they can dole that out. It's not about money. It's about power. And these son of a bitch psychopaths want absolute power, total power, microchipping, every kind of aspect of power that can be imagined. They want it, and they're trying for it. But in their lust for power, they have made a really a cardinal mistake. They could have maintained a really high and obscene, unjust level of power, if you ask me. But they don't want that. They want everything. They want total control. And I'm actually happy that that's what they want, because as they go for that more and more people are realizing, well, wait, this is completely unacceptable now, isn't it? I thought it was unacceptable long ago, but more and more people are beginning to realize this is unacceptable. And at the end of the day, how in the hell do you accept the unacceptable? It is simply unacceptable.
Well, and the problem is, of course, that for these people is that in their belief system, they actually believe, fortunately for us, that they have to tell us what it is they're doing. Not necessarily putting it on the front pages all the time, but somewhere out there, the information, the template, the script, the gameplays have to be put out there, because they work on the principle that if it's out there and then the people don't react, then that's the equivalent of giving them the social license, the contract to then pursue their agenda.
Tacit consent.
Exactly. And of course, what is occurring is that more and more people are now scanning for these blueprints. They're looking for the game plans, and they're working out how they intend to make the next move. And it's creating the opportunity, more and more opportunity, for people to preempt. So consequently, and as we've said, they're not particularly creative. We've been through, not all, but at least the major false flags over the past 13 years or so. But then we've got the other elements. I mean, what have we also had since 9/11? And the central player to both false flags and these events is, of course, none other than Donald Rumsfeld, because we've had SARS. We've had bird flu twice, spine flu, that's probably to come, swine flu, and now, of course, we've got Ebola.
Yes.
And interestingly, I think Ebola actually translates as something like the lie revealed, which is, perhaps a little ironic. But, and we've got the situation where in the US, of course, basically there are people saying, well, let's prepare for worst case scenario. Let's quarantine people. Let's shut down flights from West Africa. And Obama and co are saying no. Let's just leave it wide open, because however it is that they want to kick this thing off, that they know that they've got to create the portals for it. And of course, what we can see coming is yet another attempt at a mass vaccination program. Yes. And fortunately, once again, because of what's transpired in these past situations, one would hope that the vast majority of people will see through the vaccine scam and not touch it with the proverbial barge pole.
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly another attempt to do exactly as you say, and while there will be masses of people who will fall for this, the numbers of people who can see it for what it is are not going to fall for it. And these, so far, they continue to fail. And this gives us reason to have some optimism. And I'm not unrealistically optimistic any more than I'm unrealistically pessimistic. I mean, the bottom line is, from my perspective, that this can go either way. We do have the capacity to destroy this planet. I think it is beyond naive and very stupid, to say the least, to ignore that possibility. At the same time, this is not inevitable. We don't need to be fear-mongering here. We have the solutions, really, for all of our major problems. The solutions are already there.
Absolutely.
And ultimately, the only power that these son of a bitches have is the power that we give them. They don't have any power if we don't give it to them. And the moment that we as human beings understand this, we will be able to exert the control that we require to have a better world. And I mean a better world in terms of everyone on this planet being able to live a dignified life with clean drinking water, a roof over their head, quality food, and the ability to work maybe, 10 or 20 hours a week to be able to live that kind of life, not 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 hours a week just to be able to survive, which is what most people are doing, which basically is wage slavery. We don't need to have it like this. We all stand to gain, but we have to be able to face the truth. More and more people are. But hey, there ain't no guarantees either way, if you ask me. It really is truly up to us. And this is part of where I've come to peace with, my role in this whole game. I worked very hard and will continue to work hard. But I've come to understand that, at the end of the day, it really isn't up to me. And I'm at peace with that. If it were up to me, then this madness would stop right away, instantaneously. But it's not up to me. It's up to us. And if we decide to make it a better world, then we will make it a better world. And if we decide to be lemmings who are literally so stupid and so silly that we run ourselves off the edge of a cliff, well, we can do that too. But it ain't up to me. It's up to us. And I'm willing to accept that.
No, I absolutely concur with that. Now, Ken, you have been, for many years now, one of the activists at the forefront of the support of the Palestinian people. And of course, if we want to look for inspiration at a people who have stood in the face of literally annihilation for best part of the last, 60, nearly 70 years, then look no further than Palestine. And let me just pull this up on screen. This is the vision of the late 19th century Zionists of Theodor Herzl and Shane Wiseman. Greater Israel, all the land between the Nile and the Euphrates, and of course, at one point they managed to get up as far as the Suez Canal.
Yes,
and one might argue that the Israeli state intelligence services, otherwise known as ISIS, are doing a pretty good job of pushing the boundaries of Israel a bit further through Syria and Iraq right now. But this was the vision right from the get-go, and of course the British contributed to this dramatically with the Balfour Treaty, and then effectively their collusion in establishing the State of Israel in 1948. But then if we look at what has happened with Palestine, and despite the fact that the Balfour Treaty specifically stated that Israel, if it became or when it became a nation state, would recognize the rights of the indigenous people, but of course the Zionist government of Israel, and I know you don't even differentiate between Zionists and the Israeli government, you just lump it all together, which is a fair observation. But if we look at what Israel has done to the Palestinian people, it is nothing short of genocide.
Well, it really is. The Black's Law dictionary definition of the word genocide, which I know pretty much word for word, is, genocide is to destroy in whole or part a national, ethnic, or religious group. So by that definition, what Israel has been doing is ethnic cleansing at best, genocide at worst, and again, according to Black's Law Dictionary, which is the dictionary defining legal terms within the UK and the US and largely Western law, that is the truth. So what the Palestinians have been facing for all these decades is hard for, I think, most to even imagine. And what I think strikes me more than anything else about the Palestinians is that despite all of this horrendous treatment, where literally those who are oppressing you do not see you as human beings. You're not even a dog. You don't even register really. Mercy for you from the top levels of the Israeli government is actually an affront to God. They don't feel any compassion for the Palestinians, and the Palestinians, despite all this, have maintained a generosity and a hospitality and a kindness that is so welcoming to visitors, including people like myself who come, from a nation that is very much at the heart of their oppression. And that is amazing. Yet another example of why I have optimism, and it's not unrealistic, it's realistic optimism. If people can survive that kind of horrendous injustice for so long and still maintain their humanity and their will, well, then it says a lot about who we are as people, or at least who we can be. And the Palestinians are definitely brothers and sisters whom I feel so much love and respect for, and I've been really blessed to try in the best way I could to contribute to justice for them. But I do feel that the biggest obstacle that they have actually is not Israel, it's themselves. And all they need to do is make sure they don't sign any deal. As far as I'm concerned, do not. And you see this in Europe and the UK just on a non-binding recognized the Palestinian state. It's happening now, Sweden, all around Europe. It's happening. Think about that. Now, if all these European states with these corrupt Western governments are all now recognizing a Palestinian state, why would they do that? Are they genuinely interested in justice for Palestinians? Really? Why would we think that? I would argue the reason why is because the so-called two-state solution is the biggest disaster. It's the second Nakba. It's the biggest disaster of all. It would translate to a small Palestinian state that is economically, militarily, politically inferior, next to a Israeli state that is militarily, economically, and politically, so well connected and so superior that all they need to do is instigate one false flag or another to be able to pummel this little Palestinian state over and over. If they're two different entities, then this is what's going to happen, and the Palestinians will never know anything but never-ending injustice. One state is my opinion. One state, all people recognized as equal, and guess what? The Palestinians will be the majority in that one state, and they will have justice. So I just pray that they do not accept anything at all akin to a two-state solution. It is, in my opinion, the worst disaster of all. And that's why these Western governments are all starting to support it.
No, I absolutely concur with you. And I mean, let's acknowledge that, this is the home state of the Palestinian people. I mean, this mythology that, is pumped out, particularly in the US, that, Israel was created as a nation for a people without a land, in a land without a people. And of course, this is just outrageous to allege that, nobody was living in Palestine, that it was a desert. Yeah. When, of course, it wasn't. And in fact, the Jewish community had lived in Palestine for, literally millennia. Yeah. Alongside the indigenous population, and it was primarily due to. Hang on, we've just had a camera knock, so we just got to straighten things up a bit here. Thank you. Excuse me.
You moved through space very quickly.
Yeah, really, I did, didn't I? Yeah, it was a technical hitch. But these two peoples lived side by side in harmony until such time as the European Jewish community, ostensibly the Ashkenazi Jews, the Central European Jews, after the Second World War, decided that they would literally migrate to Israel, and through terror, and let's make no bones about it, it was abject terrorism, force the ostensibly the British to grant them their home state.
Ian, let me give you some controversial statements. That will get the
Can you controversial?
get a rise out of the politically correct thought police out there. I just, having returned from Tehran, from Iran, one of the people that I interviewed for a program that I'm producing for Press TV was a Jewish man. In fact, he's the director of a hospital, a Jewish hospital in Tehran. And that hospital is funded by Jews in Iran at 50% and the Iranian government 50%. They treat anybody. It doesn't matter what religion you are, whether you have money, don't have money, they treat everybody. And they've been doing this for many decades now. And I spoke to this Jewish person in Iran, and I thought to myself, how beautiful would it be that the Jewish population of the world could look at it the way this man did. And first off, his praise for Iran was overflowing. These Jewish individuals, which has, by the way, Iran has the largest Jewish population, I believe, outside of not Israel and I believe America. It might even be more than America. Imagine that. Iran, this nation which is considered this huge threat to Israel and the world, has the largest Jewish population. How is that possible? Well, I'll tell you why. The Jewish people have found sanctuary in Iran for millennia. Literally, while they were being ousted and kicked out of every other country they've ever been in, they have been able to live in Iran unhindered for all of this time. And they love Iran for that. And even though Israel has tried to bribe them back to Israel with money, literally, they've refused it. So this is what I'm hoping for. This is the controversial part. We look at this so-called Islamic State, which there's nothing Islamic about this at all, but nonetheless, and we know, come on, we know who's funding that, who benefits from that. What is Oded Yanan's strategy for Israel in the 1980s? What is a clean break? What is the policy for the Middle East? Come on. We can obviously sit here and talk about that and give people all the details, but go look it up. This is the plan that's been laid out. ISIS is nothing more than a Frankenstein created by us to be able to affect the justification for all of these insane policies, which favors the Greater Israel Project. And overwhelmingly, Muslims around the world reject ISIS. Overwhelmingly. The vast majority of Muslims around the world reject it for obvious reasons. And yet, we look at the Jewish state of Israel, and we look at the amount of approval that the Jewish state enjoys around the world. And while it is diminishing, it is still overwhelmingly supported by Jewish people around the world. And what I'm waiting for and what I'm pushing for is for the Jewish people of this world to say, you know what? The so-called Jewish state does not represent Judaism, does not represent me. In fact, we reject it. And ultimately, this aberration has to be separated from Judaism. But we don't have that. And I know it's politically correct to say Zionism instead of Judaism, but until Jews overwhelmingly reject the actions of the so-called Jewish state, then I see this as a representative of Judaism. And I think it's rather ridiculous for us non-Jews to be deciding for Jews what represents Judaism and what does not. We seem to think that we should be saying, oh, no, it's Zionist, it's not Jewish. Well, the Jewish people support it. So why do they support it? I want them to reject it. And the main reason why I want them to reject it, and I know I've gone on for a bit here, I will cut it off shortly, is we look at this latest slaughter in Gaza. This absolute slaughter. They wiped out 92 families, gone, erased. 92 families, never more. 500 children, over 2,000 people. A turkey shoot, fish in a barrel, people who have no real means to defend themselves just being shot at and killed in mass. And the reason why the Jewish population within Israel is so angry with Netanyahu right now is that he did not fulfill his campaign promise of, quote, finishing the job. And what that means is back in 2008, 2009 with Operation Cast Lead, the Ehud Barak, who was the leader at the time, did not finish the job, i.e. he did not exterminate everyone and get rid of Hamas. How do you get rid of Hamas? Basically exterminate the whole population. And Netanyahu did not fulfill his campaign promise of, quote, finishing the job. This is a problem, not just for Palestinians, for all of us. When you look at the Jewish state of Israel with its hundreds of nuclear weapons and this kind of attitude, and this kind of outlook towards fellow human beings, i.e. the Palestinians, this is extremely dangerous and it is completely unacceptable.
Well, and we've seen the mentality and the mindset of some of the the residents of that country, going up onto the high ground with their deck chairs to watch the annihilation of the Palestinian people. I mean, this is inhumane. I mean, because as you say, I mean, they regard them as no better than cattle. But this is the kind of mindset that we are dealing with. And by the way, Ken, I mean, obviously, I'm sure it hasn't escaped most people's notice that ISIS basically came to the forefront of the Western media in particular with their beheading campaign to take the heat off of Israel. Because increasingly, the Western media was, of course, attacking the Israeli agenda of annihilation of the Palestinian people. Indeed. And consequently, then all of a sudden, ISIS manifests, and all of the focus is on ISIS. And I maintain that ISIS is primarily a creation of the Israeli intelligence services, supported, of course, by CIA and the internationalists in the MI6 organization. That's how they're able to get their brand new Toyotas, their RPGs and their arms. Because, I've asked before, is there an eBay page or an Amazon page where you can go order this stuff? Because elsewhere in the world, you can't lay your hands on a pea shooter. But apparently, if you're in the Middle East, you can get almost anything you want.
Indeed, and like 9/11, they are getting the immediate benefits that they sought with 9/11. They're getting them with this ISIS ridiculous, play that they're presenting to us. Many people are buying it. Many people are accepting the idea that, we have to go start bombing another nation, again, and that's how we're going to fix this, and so on and so forth. But I believe on the back end, and I don't think it's going to take 5-6 years. I think it's going to take no more than a year or two, if that, for people to realize, actually, no, we created that. We created that. Our little proxies, our best friends and allies. Who are our best friends and allies in the Middle East? Saudi Arabia and Israel. Wow, really? Those are our best friends and allies. Saudi Arabia, that bastion of moderation and freedom and democracy, are good friends, cutting off heads, cutting off hands, and women can't drive alone, can't walk around alone. That's wonderful, no problem. No, I don't hear a whole lot about that in Western media. Let's sell them some arms and let's give them political cover and protect them in every way. Israel, ethnic cleansing, genocide, committing incredible crimes against humanity on a regular basis, wars of aggression, which was considered to be the supreme crime by the Nuremberg tribunals, which apparently Jews care so much about. Israel is responsible for the very same crime that Hitler was accused of being guilty of, and yet this is our best friends and allies. And then we look at our enemies, and our enemies are the ones that have the most integrity and honor. Look at Russia. They actually have a leader that you could respect. We should be well jealous of the fact that they have a real man, who actually has some integrity and some balls, no less.
And a master statesman.
Yeah, and a master statesman. And the same really goes for Iran as well. You look at the supreme leader of Iran, listen to what he actually says, what he stands for. And the reason why Iran does not have a nuclear weapons program is because God could not possibly support it. And that's a really rational way to understand your relationship with God. Does God actually want us to have nuclear weapons? Any of us? Really? You think so? He created all that is so that we could be so smart and so arrogant to create nuclear weapons and then threaten all that he created, that God created? Come on. This is the world we live in right now, and there you go. This is where we started with this conversation. You as an Englishman, me as an American-born son, there really isn't enough to be proud of, to have anything to cling to in terms of being a citizen or a subject of either of these two states. And you know what? At the end of the day, we as people are responsible for that.
And we as people of all the nations have to be responsible. And and in fact, the same with the Israelis. And I'm just going to draw the attention. I've done this before on a previous program, but this book here, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine by Ilan Pappé. Only a Jewish historian could have written this book. And as Ilan Pappé says, if anybody is under the illusion or delusion that Israel will stop its attempt to cleanse the last Palestinian and the last Arab from Greater Israel, then they are delusional. But as you rightly say, Ken, more and more people are waking up to this, and Henry Kissinger himself made the observation that by the year 2030, Israel will probably not exist. Ken, we've run out of time. It's an absolute pleasure to hook up with you, my friend, as always. And as you are well aware, I've extended the invitation to you to participate in AV6, the conference in the centre of England at Daventry in the middle of May next year. Details are on the alternativeview.co.uk website. Now, I shall be heading out to Australia in a couple of days, and my two objectives there. I'll be speaking at a number of events, the Freedom Summit events, which you're going to see a short trailer for in just a second. But then following that, I'm going to be heading up into the Australian Gaslands, where I'm going to be joining Brian Monk. And we're going to be doing some filming, and we're going to be focusing on people who have had their lives turned upside down by the unconventional gas industry, literally in the last 5 years. We still need to raise some funding for this trip and for the film and the documentary that we are intending to produce from this. And if you wish to support that, then please do so by visiting www.frackingnightmare.com. Thanks again to my guest, Ken O'Keefe, and I'll see you in about 3/4 of an hour with Fracking Nightmare.
I think that we live in a free world, and whilst it may look that way in comparison to living under a brutal dictatorship, the reality is that the Western world has never been so restricted by laws, penalties and fines, taxes, debt and poor health. And all this while the Third World struggles in appalling poverty whilst being exploited and raped by the Western world. But make no mistake, there are hundreds and thousands of Australians on the brink of bankruptcy and poverty right now. Our society is riddled with malpractice, divorce, cancer, heart disease, obesity, diabetes and depression. That is not freedom. The fact is that our freedoms and human rights are being removed every day by corporations masquerading as government, by unscrupulous banks, by corrupt pharmaceutical and medical industries, and by the international military-industrial complex that demonstrates nothing short of psychopathic behaviour. The highly controlled media machine bombards the masses with lies designed to keep people in fear, reporting only what works for the corporatocracy and the ruling elite. The world is not well. In fact, if things continue the way they are, our future is bleak. Freedom Summits are here to shine a light on the dark times, drawing together inspirational leading speakers from around the world to collaborate in showing you solutions that can bring about true change. You will leave these summits with tangible, proactive ways to make your life more purposeful, positive and full of hope, moving ever closer to being healthy, fulfilled and free. Sydney, Brisbane, Melbourne, Perth. Prepare for one of the biggest freedom summits to hit Australian shores. Come and hear from local and international speakers about the topics that seem to elude mainstream narrative, topics that need to be addressed now. Check out just some of the incredible speakers for this November round of summits. Perth, 1st and 2nd of November. Sydney, 8th and 9th of November. Melbourne, 15th and 16th of November. Brisbane, 22nd, 23rd of November.